All right, we are back on MorningLine, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're streaming live on Facebook at newschannel5.com, also on the Plus if you want to call in. And I know already a lot of people have questions about a vaccine, the research going into coming up with a treatment for COVID-19. With us next, Dr. Mark Denison is joining us from over at Vanderbilt. Can you hear me, Doctor? Good morning to you.
I can.
Thank you for joining us, Professor of Pathology, Microbiology, and Immunology. And you've been, for decades, I guess, studying the coronavirus. Coronavirus is an umbrella term. COVID-19 is one of them, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so
it's
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was to say there are thousands of coronaviruses. Most of them are in animals, and there were about 4 of them in humans before this was 4 of them, and then 2 additional, SARS and MERS, over the last 20 years.
Okay. Well, listen, yesterday the big news, one of the big stories was, the federal government in this country announcing this big multi-million, almost billion-dollar deal with Pfizer to start producing doses of some type of vaccine if and when one is approved and ready to roll. I just wanted to get your take on it. They were saying maybe something by December. I know Vanderbilt is involved with much of this vaccine research. What is your take on all that?
Well, I think it's urgent that we move all these things in parallel. In the past, vaccine development would have taken years and years and years, and it would have been one step at a time with extreme regulatory oversight and a lot of proof required before moving products forward. I think we can't afford that now, and we can't afford not to move forward quickly with parallel studies. There are multiple vaccines that are in trials, and they all have slightly different approaches, but they all have the same common goal: to develop immunity against the virus that would be protective. So I think that it's critical. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of resources for scientists, for physicians. It's a brand new approach in terms of really trying to stimulate and get these vaccines available much more quickly.
All right, and I guess the question right now, in terms of development of a vaccine, once you get the idea and you go on that path, I'm not sure what phase it is, before it's made available to the general public, there are human trials, correct? And you need individuals to volunteer to do these trials, and that's really where you decide if it's going to work or not?
That's correct. The first phase is called phase 1, which is safe. They call it safety and efficacy, meaning, is it safe to use? Can we find the right dose that's safe to use and that still gives you an immune response against the virus? The kinds of work we were initially doing here with the Moderna vaccine was that we got samples of people's blood from around the country and tested them for their ability to kill the virus. That's called neutralization. So they need to be able to kill the virus, but they also have to be safe. They can't be dangerous. So finding that dose is about phase 1, and confirming that, in fact, that vaccine actually creates an immune response. That's phase 1. I'll skip phase 2 because that's really an expansion of phase 1. But phase 3 is the actual, what's called an efficacy trial, which is where you give it to huge numbers of people. And then you follow those people along, and you see how many of the people who got the vaccine or didn't get the vaccine develop the disease, and if they get infected, how ill do they get? What happens to them? That's where you're actually testing whether the vaccine works in nature.
All right, and my understanding of a way a vaccine works in general is, you get a little bit of it, usually the dead vaccine. It's safe to take, and then your body reacts to it and creates the antibodies to protect you when you get exposed to the real deal. And I guess we're seeing some reports now that there are folks that are becoming reinfected a second time with COVID-19, and that raises the concern in my mind. I mean, if that's true, is COVID something that you can't get a vaccine for if these folks are being reinfected?
I think it's really important to not use a sort of winner-loser approach to this problem. It's much more subtle and much more complex than that. There's many different things that, if you expose millions of people to a disease or to a virus, there's going to be a great range of disease. There's going to be a great range of immune response to that disease. If you use a vaccine, let's say the hepatitis vaccine or the measles vaccine, less so. Some people will respond fantastically to the vaccine. Other people may not respond at all to the first dose of the vaccine. And that has to do with human variation, not just virus variation. So that's the first thing, is you can't call it an all or none. Second is it depends on what your goals are for a vaccine. If the goal is to develop broad herd immunity, as we call it, basically we're working not just for the individual, but we're working for the public, right? We're trying to say in Nashville, if we could get 70 to 80% of people immune, then that virus doesn't have anywhere to go. If it infects me, then, and you have had the vaccine and all the 5 people around me have had the vaccine, that virus is a dead end. It's not going to go anywhere and hurt anybody else. So vaccines don't just protect the individual, they protect the whole public. And that's really the important part of this. This issue associated with whether people can get reinfected or not, I think that is, that's played up dramatically if it's occurring. There is no specific direct evidence yet that this is a common phenomenon. Coronaviruses, in general, we can get as the cold ones, the ones that cause the common cold that I've been studying for so many years. They can reinfect us every 2 to 3 years, but we don't get ill. We don't get really ill at all. So I think that's another goal.
I've got a few questions here from folks on Facebook wondering too, you're testing to see if it works. And of course you said phase 3, you do that with human trials. Can you explain to people how those who have volunteered, and I respect the heck out of them, for these trials are protected and that they are not at risk for becoming infected in these trials?
Okay, number one, there is no vaccine being used that has a live virus. All right, none of the vaccines that are currently being studied have a live coronavirus. Right? They all express a specific protein from the virus that we make our immunity to. It's called the spike protein. So that's the first thing, is you can't get COVID from these vaccines. You cannot get COVID from these vaccines.
Okay.
They are not capable of doing that. There's no virus there. So you can't get infected.
Gotcha. Kind of like how we hear about flu shots. Now, I'm not speaking to those who are the anti-vacciners. I know there's a group of them out there, but I think some in the general public who maybe go get flu shots are going to be concerned if and when this new vaccine comes about, because as you just said, typically that's 2-3 years in the making. We're fast tracking it, I think, with good reason. But if and when one finally becomes available, maybe as soon as December, I mean, how confident should people be? Because I think a lot of people are saying, no way, I'm not sure I'm confident to go take this shot now, fearing that it may make them sick. I suppose you just answered that partially there. Any final vaccine is not going to have any of the live virus in it, correct? But how confident will people be knowing that it was fast-tracked? They're going to think, oh, well, you didn't do all the research you had to do.
This is a really important point, too, is no steps are being skipped. Instead of being done sequentially, they're being done in parallel.
Okay.
So there are no steps of safety and efficacy being skipped. Absolutely not. There are what are called drug safety monitoring boards that look at every single piece of data. And even as the data comes in, let's say they started giving it and they saw that people were having reactions to the vaccine that were severe, they would stop using that dose and reassess whether that vaccine was useful. If they're giving a vaccine and it's not inducing an immune response, they might stop using that vaccine. If they give the vaccine and they find that people are getting more infections or they're getting worse infections, they're watching it as they go. So there's no steps are being skipped. These steps are just all being done in parallel instead of in series.
And where do we stand then? And as you've seen it there and with what's being done at Vanderbilt, can you give us a little bit of a take then on, that report yesterday said maybe by December, and Dr. Fauci's been talking about maybe early 2021. What do you see as a potential timetable? And I know there's a lot of ifs, buts, and ands in there, but how is it looking right now?
So I think a lot of this depends also on the trajectory of the epidemic. We're approaching these things in ways that we never have before, but never in human history, even including the 1918 flu, have we ever encountered anything like this that's affecting all 7.5 billion people on the planet at the same time from a social and personal and economic perspective. So we have to think of things, how do we accelerate these things and get them into people? And that's why the U.S. government is investing vast amounts of money to companies that have a potential vaccine candidate but hasn't ever been proven. Almost $2 billion to Pfizer yesterday. A good company, good product, but we don't know. And so, but I think when we think about the daily cost to our country, it's dramatic. So I think that several of these have already shown, the Moderna one that we did work on, and others have shown their ability to induce good immune responses in people. And those are the kind of immune responses that look like the immune responses people get if they've had the virus. So that's very encouraging. We have no idea yet whether broadly those immune responses are protective against reinfection. In animal studies that have gone on so far, they are. They do appear to lessen or reduce or prevent infection. So that's very hopeful. So I think if this is in the early trials, as this is going forward, if there's ways to really have enough of a signal, if we have enough people in an area that's a lot of diseases going on, and you give the vaccine and it's obvious that they're getting protected, or that there's fewer people getting infected that got the vaccine, then that would move forward and quickly begin even larger trials and getting that into more people. So is the end of the year. I'm not a regulator.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea what it takes to make that kind of doses, but I think that they are going to try and aim for those things. And I think it's not pie in the sky. It's possible to have these things by the beginning of the year.
Okay, great. As someone as yourself who has studied coronaviruses for decades now, I wonder, I guess they all take on a little bit of a personality of their own. There were some that hoped that maybe when we hit the summer months, and gosh, here in Nashville, you know how hot it's been lately, that maybe the heat and the sunshine would reduce the spread of this virus. Clearly, we see that's not the case. Whereas in other viruses, it is not true sometimes. Warmer weather, it tends to go away, which is why we so often have flu season when it's colder and wetter out.
Yeah. So I never said that. I always said that this virus was not going to go away this summer because it's a brand new virus in humans and there's no immunity. The viruses that you're talking about that we encounter are ones where there's typically broad immunity in the population, and so the at-risk population is limited. Flu comes around every winter because it changes significantly, and that's why we have to get a different vaccine every year. Coronaviruses, there was no data to ever indicate that this would go away when it got warm, and I think what we're seeing now is, in fact, the kinds of activity that remember, viruses don't care. If I was going to put a label on it, I'd say, I don't care. I'm a virus. They don't care about anything. They don't know that they don't care. They have no agency. They have no personality. They just move from person to person. And if we as humans create the social opportunities for them to do that, they will succeed. And the virus that's here tomorrow is the one that was successful in moving between two people today. So I think that we can't, this virus, you're right, every coronavirus has its own personality, and this one is particularly bad, exceptionally bad. But we can control it, and it's been clear in other countries and other places that can be controlled by really putting some of these issues in place that are just social management of our own behavior. And so I think that that's the best way that we can reduce this right now.
Sir, stay right where you are. We have to take a quick break, if that's all right with you. We have some more questions and a few phone calls for you, if that's all right. We'll take a break and be back with more right after this. Stay right with us.